Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. So, as Maggie so eloquently put it, we're going to have a panel on future-proofing DeFi. And when I was prepping for this panel, I was getting pretty excited because I was feeling like what we're going to discuss today sort of begins to show the promise of what DeFi is about and what people have been excited about all along. I think a lot of people have seen the technology grow from a very incipient phase to these new developments that we're going to be discussing in a moment. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. So on that note, how would the three of you say that DeFi has evolved over these last few years?
Well, I think DeFi in general kind of was born a few years ago, and I feel that it started from like small experimentations into and evolved into actual protocols that we use ongoing basis and build more applications around. I do think that something that has happened in DeFi is that it's starting to get more mature and build up, and to the point that when we think about DeFi, it doesn't feel anymore that these are kind of like more of a small hobby projects, but actually they're attracting quite significant liquidity. And I think the maturity hasn't come from just by building, but actually various different kinds of events that has happened in the past couple of years. So we saw, for example, FTX, we saw a lot of the market down cycles coming, and something that amazing happened during this time period is that DeFi and many of these DeFi protocols showed resiliency. So what it actually proved is that these communities that are governing these protocols have been able to come together and figure out different types of risk parameters and build this technology in a way that it's resilient to these types of market movements. And that has been really interesting. And then obviously there's other interesting things regarding of RWAs that has been really fascinating category. And overall we see more excitement of products that didn't exist before.
Mo?
Sure. I think Stani said this well, and also thank you all for coming. I think DeFi has definitely matured, and when you look at the convergence between what has been incubating and sort of cooking up over the last decade to where we are today, you're seeing that maturation really take form in the interest of large institutions. Sergey and I were just in Zurich debating with banks and regulators, and they're all trying to understand how they get to participate in this in this space. And so that facilitation, however, requires very responsible approaches across the board. And Stani kind of hinted at some unfortunate circumstances that broke trust with institutions and the mass adoption opportunities. So we've been kind of rebuilding collectively as a group of individuals here, and many of you in this room to bring us back to where we should be. From Aptos's perspective, we're thinking about this with infrastructure that's designed to evolve, to be able to not only have this convergence take place, but to go beyond that in a way that it challenges the large financial institutions and the systems that have been hardened. And so it's unbelievable to be in a place, in a very comfortable place, I guess, on this couch, where people are looking to us, and we finally have the maturation within different parts of the DeFi stack to feel the comfort that we're ready for this next frontier.
Yeah, this is definitely the most comfortable couch and panel I've ever been. Whoever got this set up is knows what they're doing. But yeah, to answer the question, so yeah, DeFi when it started was sub 100 million in TVL. There were maybe 10 to 15 total teams. I think at that point Aave was called ETHLend, or ETHLend had come right before Aave. And you had a kind of enough value that there was enough value that wanted a financial product. So the first thing you had to hit was enough value in the system for a financial product to make sense. Because if there isn't enough value to put into these systems like lending protocols, so that's kind of the first threshold. And people are negative sometimes about, oh, there's all this money flowing into crypto, what's the point? Well, the point is it creates this kind of big economic base that you could build other things on. So first that economic base came, then great protocols like Aave came, and Chainlink's role was helping facilitate that in some technical sense with Oracle networks and data and these types of things. I think then everyone got really excited about DeFi, and people tried to make it efficient and actually a good system that was able to work efficiently. There were a number of problems with the fees and computational capacity and block space and the fee structure that created. But then, even more money flowed in, so it made sense. And I think now we're kind of at a place where we're really trying to make sure that DeFi is a better alternative to CeFi. And I think making DeFi a better alternative to CeFi is the thing that'll make those more traditional firms particularly interested in it. And the thing that's different now from the beginning is that they are genuinely interested. If you were to talk to traditional firms even 2-3 years ago, they would say DeFi, it's all going to go away. It's going to get regulated out of existence. But now you're seeing a lot of them think about, okay, if I go on a public chain, how do I interact with a DeFi protocol? And for them, there's a number of conditions that need to be met that aren't the same conditions as another DeFi protocol interacting with the DeFi protocol. So I think meeting those conditions will be important. And just the fundamental value of DeFi versus CeFi for the same operation or the same financial product will be kind of the new standard we all need to meet, which I think in many cases we'll be able to do that. And so more and more value will flow into DeFi.
Yeah, so let's now talk about a specific proposal that kind of will, put some specifics on some of the things that you said. So Aave is considering a proposal with Aptos, but actually, sorry, before we get there, let's just also talk about Aave's 2030 vision, which sort of sets the stage for this potential partnership. But talk about that, yeah, what's Aave 2030?
Yeah, Aave 2030 is it's basically a vision that we want to lay down from the Aave Labs and propel a little bit of the direction as well where the innovation should go towards in the Aave ecosystem, but also where we think about where DeFi will grow from here. So the proposal is there's different kinds of initiatives in the proposal, for example, from a new branding as an example that we already, so if anyone now goes to, I don't know, CoinGecko or to the Aave app, you see the new branding and new logos and whatnot. So that is part of it, but also a new version of the Aave protocol, which is the V4. And V4 essentially is an iteration of the Aave protocol to make it more flexible for different kinds of use cases, improving the capital efficiency, adding better granular risk management as well, and also having more flexible architecture that can also cater institutional use cases. And we can talk a little bit more about the institutional side, and I'm a big believer that at some point, whether it's DeFi, CeFi, or Fi, they all will come together, and it's just going to be a new financial rails that we all going to transact upon. And part of this bigger initiative also is the non-EVM aspect as well. So we're in somewhat born and raised on the Ethereum ecosystem, and we're big believers on what we're building and the scalability of Ethereum with L2s as an example. But we also recognize that beyond the EVM, there is a lot of opportunity to actually capture user base and go towards more adoption. And these types of opportunities also bring more rails for institutions to join as well. And I think that's the big part of the 2030 vision.
And then, so now let's talk about the proposal to make Aptos the first non-EVM chain. How did that come about? How did you pick Aptos? Like, what are the benefits to that particular non-EVM chain?
Well, one particular challenging part about the whole non-EVM aspect is that you have to deal with completely new technology, a completely new language, and a code base. Yeah, and that is something that is really, it's a starting point when you're building something like the Aave protocol, which has significant complexity. It's not a typical AMM protocol. It has various components that also need active management and a lot of tooling as well. What struck out us as an interesting angle for Aptos is that the actual support that the Aptos team from the engineering side has provided. So what's interesting is that Aptos is, the language of Aptos is Move, and it has certain similarities of Rust, but it's still a different language. So it's a different perspective that we're approaching towards this non-EVM deployment. And it's something that our team by itself could not necessarily go finish from end to end and need a lot of know-how. And luckily we have your engineering team that has been really helpful on navigating. And also something that is interesting about the Aptos ecosystem is that there's engineers that are heavily already in the ecosystem building these protocols and have been helping as well. I see Alex, you're smiling there. That's one of the engineers that has been helping us actually to navigate the space and build. So that's been one of the key components. And I think Aptos is also interested also in the institutional angle, and I think that's going to be a significant growth category.
And Mo, do you want to talk about some of the design choices you made with Aptos to probably address problems that you felt existed with existing chains?
Yeah, I mean, Stani kind of answered the question, so I feel like you stole my answer. But like all those things, I think are very important to us when it comes to engineering support, a new smart contract language designed from the ground up to be able to make smart contracts easier to write, but also having things like a move prover, a formal verification engine that basically gives a lot more safety and security ultimately to the end user. And so when we were building this blockchain, going back to our Facebook days, it was designed for billions of people. It was designed for developers to be able to build applications to kind of test the limits of decentralized apps. And so, some of those design decisions are deeply rooted in that, in some of those goals. But I would say the one fundamental difference for us relative to other protocols out there is that we're grounded in evolution. We think protocols need to be able to evolve with the demand that's needed by the market. And in order for us to be able to do that, we have to continuously be upgrading the protocol and all the different components within that protocol. For example, if Move needs to evolve, right, if the smart contract language needs to be able to provide more flexibility in the future, we need to be able to bring that, and we're already moving towards Move 2. If the consensus mechanism needs to evolve to improve latency or increase throughput, we need to be able to do that, and we're going from hot stuff to shoal plus now. And then of course, if you think about data and storage and all the other components that need to work together, all of these things have to be, a seamless operating system for the future of DeFi. And I think Stani said this well, right? Like we're trying to grow the pie here, and it's amazing that this room is packed end to end, but we want the rooms to get bigger. We want to fill the stadium halls, and in order to do that, we need to provide a protocol that can help facilitate that in a way that Aave can grow, in the way that interoperability can evolve. And we're right there as a functioning component of that, a key functioning component of that. And so obviously very exciting for us to be working closely with Stani and his team, along with Sergey and his team, on making this vision not only a 2030 vision, but also a little bit of a reality starting today.
Yeah, and let's just zoom out for a second, because I feel like we're talking about interoperability as a theme, and Sergey, could you just talk a little bit about why that's so important and why that's like a focus here?
Yeah, sure. Just really quickly before that. So I think Aave and Stani and the whole kind of Aave community have really been cutting edge, and I think that there's even a concept of a 2030 plan shows a lot of thoughtful planning, and the fact that there's going to be a single system that's DeFi, CeFi, TradFi, everything all on one set of rails is very telling of where the world's going, if someone like Aave and Stani feel that way. So that's just one of the first things, because they've always been on the cutting edge. They were the first successful lending protocol. I always look at Stani and Aave and the Aave community as like a barometer of what might be happening next, and it's usually pretty predictive. And then when I look at Mo, and his team, which is a very competent, very technically savvy team, I feel like they're building a chain that's going to appeal to lots of institutions to put value on that chain because of some of its key properties. And I know, some of them are looking at that, and it's like a very positive direction. So with all of that said, I think interoperability will end up having to work across both public chains and bank chains, private chains, that both of these worlds will eventually merge into a single, what we call the Internet of Contracts, where just like on the internet, you have fintechs and you have big banks, and they're on a single internet. And being on a single internet means that they all benefit from each other's liquidity and each other's features. And that internet is defined by a certain set of protocols like TCP/IP to connect all these different applications together. So that's what I think is fundamentally needed to take the industry to the next stage, so that all the value that's going to be in the private bank chains and all the value in the public chains and all the value in all the different places is merged into a single Internet of Contracts. And I do think a significant portion of that value will go on to newer chains like Aptos because of some of its more advanced features. And I do think that the DeFi protocols like Aave that are set up to accept that value from this kind of larger traditional market will also be in a very beneficial position. Our role in all this is providing those protocols for data transfer and cross-chain connectivity, namely the chain link data protocols, and in the case of cross-chain, CCIP, which seeks to play the same role as TCP/IP for the internet. So that's kind of the key contribution I feel our community is making to connecting everything, so that liquidity can flow and something like Aave can be successful, not just from a public chain perspective, but a private chain perspective and just on a global level.
And so we talked about kind of like why Aave might choose Aptos for its first non-EVM, but I imagine also Aave, being such a leader in DeFi, brings benefits to Aptos. So do you want to talk about that, Mo?
Yeah, totally. I mean, going back to like what Sergey said earlier, the Aave community is a very special community. And I was talking to Stani earlier, we were preparing for this panel, and it's kind of crazy to count the number of years in a decade at this point, right? Like it's been a long time that Stani and this amazing community has kind of pushed the boundaries through multiple cycles to get to where we are today. And so, similar for us, like our principle is to be able to evolve, as I mentioned earlier. And so this is one of the most resilient, one of the most strengthened communities that has gone through iteration after iteration to get to where we are today, where you can be in a conversation with financial institutions to talk about the benefits of DeFi in that TradFi is very interested and wants to participate. So when we looked at a bunch of different DeFi protocols out there across the landscape, and I think it came down to an assessment of the community that then of course led us to, if you look at the advancements and the innovation that has taken place in a decade, not to age you, and you had a baby along the way, and yeah, it's amazing stuff. But it's been phenomenal to see that vision, going back to many years ago, evolve to where it is today. And of course, thinking about the future vision for Aave going out into the next decade. I think all of that may sound great, but it's really the execution that then also matters, right? And so, even getting a taste of where we are today with the conversations that we're having with the Aave community, it's been amazing to get all that feedback and to be able to iterate and respond to that feedback. And so, of course you want a very vibrant community, you want one that's going to be resilient through cycles, but you want it to continue to remain incredibly engaged. And that's what we find as empirical evidence today. And so, there aren't that many special protocols out there in the world, and we couldn't be more excited than working with the Aave community and Stani and the team.
We also see that a lot of the community members, they stick in the Aave community. So we have a lot of builders and non-builders also that have some sort of enthusiasm or some sort of interest in of the protocol and what we built over the years. So I kind of feel that the community aspect and the decentralization is really undermined in DeFi, but in overall. And decentralization can be really a big bottleneck. So for example, any kind of initiative, innovation, has to go through a governance process, and you have to have a consensus around different initiatives, and that's time consuming. So obviously a centralized operator can move, for example, faster, but having this process also adds a lot of diligence at the same time. And it's actually quite nice to see a team like Aptos valuing this type of contributors in our ecosystem.
It's a really good point. I think that engaging dialogue, and it is also something we witnessed across, multiple implementations that y'all have done in the past too, right? And so this is one of the few teams, if not one of the only teams, that can handle a very, complex, innovative technology as the next implementation. And I mean, it's amazing to see Move and Aptos, kind of frontier into with this community. And I think it's kind of almost a little bit of a perfect matchup when we think about how open we've been, and whether it's working together with your team, but also the engagement that we've seen with the Aave community and the Aptos community and the other DeFi ecosystems already happening. Like, that has just been a testament to what you talked about.
Yeah, I would say like the synergies are both technical but also like business essentially, which is another way of talking about community. So now let's talk about Chainlink, because that's also a piece of this. So Sergey, Chainlink kind of evolved from just providing price data, and now it also has compute interoperability services. So just talk about the full development and the suite of things you offer.
Yeah, so more advanced smart contract applications are usually a combination of smart contract code and Oracle networks. Smart contract code has critical state, certain critical computations. Oracle networks create consensus and verification on things that are about the outside world. So this could be data sources, could be connections to other chains, could be identity, could be connection to AI models, could be connection to payment systems. Basically everything that a smart contract needs to be made as reliable or as close to as reliable as the smart contract itself. And so all the universe of things out there is quite large. The Oracle problem, I think, initially was understood as just providing on-chain data, but really it's the problem of generating consensus and verification of non-blockchain things. And the non-blockchain things being verified together with the verification of blockchains is what creates the more advanced use cases. So Chainlink has now, over the 7 years that it's been working and being built, has evolved beyond just providing market data, which is where it started, which is where our collaboration, I think the first feed on Chainlink ever was for Aave. So from those humble beginnings of a single feed, there's over 1,000 Oracle networks on production. If you count testnet staging, there's literally thousands. And the Oracle networks are on various topics because you need off-chain computation, you need access to identity, like for the institutional stuff, you need access to other chains, you need, I think, more and more access to AI models as an agent or as something that acts on behalf of the smart contract or tells the smart contract what to do. So that the evolution of what the Oracle problem solves has evolved, I think, in lockstep with what the Chainlink community is able to make Oracle networks do. And the more that Oracle networks can do, the more that great teams and communities like Aave can build, and the more that block space in advanced chains like Aptos is able to do. So I think Oracle networks as overall technology accelerates both the use cases and what is possible within the block space of any one specific chain. So I feel like it's generally beneficial to the whole industry if Oracle networks can provide access to more data, more chains, more AI models, more identity. It expands the universe of what can be built, and the universe we're particularly focused on expanding into now is the institutional universe, which is where there's a lot of value, and as you've heard from both Stani and Mo, is a place where there's a genuine interest in getting that value and that usership into their applications and environments. And so hopefully Chainlink can help solve those problems as well, which is also a version of the Oracle problem, in my opinion.
So now let's also talk about the Chainlink cross-chain interoperability protocol. How is it well, first of all, why don't you describe what that is, and then you two can talk about how you use that to help, resolve fragmentation in a multi-chain ecosystem.
Yes, so the fundamental problem is that existing cross-chain bridges are often not secure, which is why they keep getting hacked. Many of them are basically 2 of 2 multi-sigs, or something where you wrap someone else's bridge, and basically the security of them is very, very low. This is why you continue to experience hacks. This was the same situation that the Chainlink community helped solve for the data side. So when Chainlink emerged, there were people trying to solve the Oracle problem for data, and it was an unsolved problem, and it's one of the reasons why value couldn't flow into DeFi, is because you couldn't have a reliable price source to allow a DeFi protocol to function at a certain level of security. And so the CCIP protocol, first and foremost, like all the other things the Chainlink community builds, should solve the core security problems. And so far, it's been solving those problems because there haven't been any issues, any value lost, and so on. The second problem is fragmented liquidity. So fragmented liquidity is that there's liquidity on various chains, and you really shouldn't have to care about the liquidity on the chain where you go live. Just like you don't care about the liquidity about the cloud where you launch your web app, right? You launch your Web 2 application on Google Cloud or AWS or GCP or wherever, and you connect to all the liquidity in all the applications across the internet. That's kind of the world that I think we need to arrive at for this industry to really grow into what it should be. And then the chains that are more performant, have better security features, have formal verification, have a lot of the properties that Mo has been describing about Aptos, will I think become preferred environments because of their speed, efficiency, security, and various other features. So the second big problem is, how do you get liquidity from being fragmented and living on 15 different L1s and 200 different L2s and 300 different L3s and 500 different L4s and 7,000 different L5s, and I could just do this all night, right? How do you just let everybody interact with everything in a secure way, not in a 2 of 2 multi-sig, don't worry, the keys are in my laptop, but it's fine. It's like multi-chain didn't happen, right? So this is the big challenge, and I think the Chainlink community is the best position to solve this challenge, because the cross-chain connectivity problem is another consensus Oracle network problem. It's basically the same problem of data transfer, just on the topic of cross-chain rather than the topic of data, like market data. And also CCIP has a bunch of institutional features so that it's the standard for institutions, and all the value from those institutions can flow, once again, unifying liquidity. Like unified liquidity would be very nice, and the better applications like Aave and the more performant environments like Aptos, I think, would benefit from a world of unified liquidity, because they would be the place where value flows at a larger percentage than other places because of all their great properties.
And it's actually like a really big problem at the moment, the whole liquidity fragmentation, but also the fact that these users who come to Web3, and there is some activity happening on one network and another activity on another one, and then you heard about a third network, and then you have to bridge your funds, and then you have to bridge them back because you want to, convert your funds again, and all this kind of like complexity is just like temporarily, and it disappears when all these networks, like I do think that being able to create let's say an L2 for a specific use case, and that might be the case for example, for Aave, with the Aave network, where that L2 is optimized for lending and borrowing, or DeFi in general, and then you have different types of L2s, there is a lot of value there. But at the same time, it comes now with the cost of user experience. Mm-hmm. So all this is actually like a temporary problem at the moment, and I think it's going to disappear very soon. And CCIP is quite an interesting solution, and we're already using it with cross-chain Go. So Go is minted safely and securely on Ethereum, but then it's basically messaged and across other networks where you have a cap to spend Go there. So it's basically, we're living in a weird time where we have all these different networks, and it feels really complex and really painful, but I think this is going to soon be over, and the world will look much more nicer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm part of that, user base that feels so frustrated that the experience hasn't gotten better. I started off building Ethereum in 2017, and so, looking at where we are today, like I'm sure all of you have an amazing amount of value sitting in different wallets. Now, how do you bring that over in a safe, secure way to, have the experience that you want, whatever that might be? And so, what Chainlink is building is it's almost the most instrumental part in making sure that the user experience is at parity with Web 2, right? And ideally, we move towards something even better where it completely sits within the background. And so, it's phenomenal that you guys have built something like that gets us to this setup. And I'm kind of curious, right? Like, sorry to maybe jump in with a question to Sergey on this point, because like one thing that's important for us is as a focus on both institutional and Web3 native DeFi protocols is like, how are you thinking about bridging this together? Like, I got a little bit of a taste of this last week when we were in Zurich, but this part is also going to be really, really important for us.
Yeah, so it's two sets of requirements. So the public chain folks have one set of requirements, and the TradFi capital market folks have another set of requirements. And if you're going to create an internet of contracts that merges the private chains and the public chains and unifies liquidity across all these chains so that the user experience for everybody can just be like the internet, you're on the internet, you can use any other application on the internet, you have to meet both of those requirements, right? On the public chain world, those requirements are, often speed, cost, and a few other really basic sets of requirements. And CCIP is built to be a very low-level standard that people can build other interfaces on, all kinds of other liquidity provisioning systems on, so it's the low-level infrastructure for that. And then in TradFi, you have a different set of requirements that often involve identity, compliance, a whole bunch of other features, which Chainlink is already kind of the leader in many ways. So last week in Zurich, we went live with Fidelity and Signum Bank on production, live for real value, providing certain critical data about NAV, net asset value. So right now, all of this data and all of this cross-chain stuff really has to interact in a very specific way for a transaction to happen in the traditional world. And then that interaction unlocks that liquidity and that value to interact with a public chain. And in this case, to interact with something like Aave v3 on Aptos, but in a way that complies with the requirements for that value to interact across public chain and a private chain. So yeah, the problem is not as simple as how do we connect all the DeFi protocols against their requirements. If the majority of the world's value is going to come from the institutional side, which it's not going to come by user count, but I think it will come by volume, right? So you're literally talking about probably tens of thousands of institutional users, but when you look at their total value compared to the millions of average retail or hedge fund users,
Massive.
the total value of those tens of thousands institutional users will be hundreds of trillions. And the value of those millions of retail and hedge fund and other users will be probably in the single digit to low double digit trillions, probably not more than 10 trillion. So if you're going to unify liquidity globally, you have to solve both sets of requirements. And that's kind of the challenge. That's why you see Chainlink consistently working with the biggest infrastructures, the biggest clearing and settlement systems. We're now in the process of starting to work with central banks. All of this stuff is part of the same plan to unify this liquidity so that applications like Aave can get more liquidity and the performance of Aptos can be what matters, not the liquidity that's on Aptos to begin with. That a chain is really good at what it does, and so all the liquidity can come to it for what it does well, not because the liquidity was already there.
If this proposal gets adopted, then can you each maybe just talk a little bit about what it will look like for users and how their lives will be different when they're using this if this comes to pass?
Yeah, it's. I think there's multiple benefits there. I do agree what Sergey said about the kind of institutional angle and what is important in terms of the data feeds. In general, data feeds are important for DeFi, and one of the most complex thing is actually having quality price feeds, and that points all back to 2017-18, where we tried to basically build our own Oracle as well on Aave, and we realized like how actually complicated challenge and how much focus you need to be on this particular challenge, and with the right infrastructure as well. And what is interesting here is actually like, I mean, we all know that there's this every year meme that, you know, institutions are coming to the space, and especially with the ETFs, there is more excitement at the moment, but I think there's a lot of actually face value there, because now, for example, with BlackRock, Little Fund, they've been able to cross 500 million in AUM at the moment, and that's the first, like, a really big institution actually going towards doing real DeFi stuff. So it's not only just, you know, doing a, you know, fuzzy transaction on chain and, like, you know, making a big PR announcement. This is actually like something really interesting and working, and as they start to scale and other institutions start to looking to the space, they are going to look into different networks where they get these different properties, performance, and there's going to be areas where DeFi is going to pile up, and I think Aptos is one of those avenues as well. And I would say from user perspective, moving liquidity should be obviously seamless, so that comes from CCIP, price feeds for different assets. That's basically Chainlink price feeds, and obviously the speed, the true proof of transactions is very fascinating. So Aave kind of is also a little bit of like a catalyst, because having a ability to swap is one of the fundamentals of a DeFi ecosystem, and lending borrowing is another kind of like a fundamental pillar as well. So being able to have Aave and Aptos, and being able to also have main components of DeFi, you actually start to see like the whole DeFi financial layer expand on Aptos. And then you can start seeing other types of use cases where you might need more speed, and you start building applications on top of this DeFi base layer where you might want to have more frequency. And actually that can go to two different directions. That can mean more sophisticated trading on chain, which is very interesting. And the other aspect is actually payments on chain as well, in a very low cost, efficient manner. So those are the directions, and then Aave being that backbone of the DeFi and financial layer is the crucial catalyst of actually expanding into Aptos.
Yeah, I would say, like, you know, it's Open Finance Day here, right? So maybe kind of plugging that in as a response. You know, we all sort of envisioned many years ago where this world would sort of evolve, and what I think is unfair to many of us in this room and many others in the space is having to deal with a user experience that does not get you to at parity with the Web2 world, and then of course extend beyond that in a way that open financial systems become the norm versus talking about DeFi, CeFi, and whatever it might be. So open finance is absolutely the place that we should be driving towards. Now, how do you get there, right? You need a protocol where transactions are not going to fail, right? And I'm sure Aave probably did a very deep analysis across all the protocols out there, and we're, you know, very proud to be sort of noticed as like a new entrant into the space, having built this protocol for billions of people inside of, you know, Facebook's walls. And so now imagine, you know, going back to your question, Laura, of, you know, what do Aave users get? I mean, they get this reach with infrastructure that can extend them into the future, and get to that vision of open finance that we've all sort of had. And it kind of takes me back to, you know, in again, early days of ETH, there were very few things that you could do when ETH was just a blip on the radar. You know, Aave was one of those things. And it allowed for, massive opportunities of creation of new economies. And I think, with Aptos, we're excited because that work now could extend into creating new opportunities for, anyone that is interested in the future of open financial systems in a way that, someone like Fidelity could take advantage of it. Someone like BlackRock could take advantage of it. And, it is a meme, I guess, that like the institutions are coming, but they actually are here, right? BIDL is $500 million of value. You have some of the world, we just invested with BlackRock in a tokenization platform called Securitize. And so, that value that has accrued in the Aave community, imagine being able to extend that into traditional financial systems that measure value on the order of trillions, right? And so this is, I think, perhaps like an underspoken opportunity that we probably should be highlighting and celebrating more. Because of course next year we will say the same, that the institutions are coming, and there'll be new institutions, right? And I think we're excited about that journey.
And RWA is big part of that.
Massive,
So it's actually interesting. I spend a lot of time looking at the DeFi Llama dashboard on all the things that is happening in DeFi, and I'm pulling more and more towards the RWA XYZ dashboard and seeing like what's happening on the DeFi at the RWA space. So that's a big part of that institutional movement. And also what we talked about back in Hong Kong a few months earlier is that a lot of the DeFi innovation also, it happens actually where the people's attention is and over internet. So Web3 doesn't need to exist in a silo and this like one separate like universe and, and events like this, but actually like it can be across the internet, and it can really change the way we think about just payments in overall. Like today, as we discussed, like if you want to go and subscribe or like read an article online, it might be under a paywall, and you have to pay for annual subscription or a monthly basis, even if you want to read just one article. And that's just an example of like a broken monetization or broken payments model that existing online and is adopted in a very big scale. And with things like Aptos and things like with DeFi and down the line with Go, you could just scroll that article, and with every scroll or time you spend, you could actually pay a little transaction fee for actually the gratitude of reading that piece of content. And that's just like a one small example. So like I think that a lot of this DeFi innovation will come forward, meaning that we have this incredible backend now, like a backbone of decentralized finance being built, and now we're going towards more of experiences and how we actually integrate more towards internet. And I think that's going to be really cool, and that requires even more builders that are focusing on these protocols and connectivity angles and underlying networks as well. And that's going to be really exciting because that actually touches the users that are everyday users, and that gives more visibility on how actually DeFi and blockchain-based payments could actually work and empower users.
I'm getting the signal that we're over time, but I know Sergey did not get to answer this question, so could you just kind of quickly talk about that future vision, and then we will call it a wrap.
Yeah, so I think Aave is always pushing the limits of what's possible, and once again, that's just something that I've always found really impressive by the Aave community about like, hey, what's next? How do we keep on top? How do we keep winning? How do we make the best lending protocol? And that's the kind of ethos that's really instilled in some of the key organizations and the larger community there. So I think this proposal is a side effect of that kind of mindset within the Aave community about what's next, how do we get to the next level. I mean, I'm sure there'll be even more proposals, but I think the way the next level looks is all the great features in V3, then even more features in V4, then more features in V5, and then all of the kind of dynamics that you end up seeing in more advanced chains, like Aptos get put to good use, and then those new capabilities evolve and grow and become even more advanced, and then because of this mindset that the Aave community has, it'll make the most use of those capabilities as well. So I think when I see different proposals, I try to think about what is the underlying kind of force driving that proposal. And with Aave, it's consistently, how do we win? How do we stay the best protocol of its type? how do we make all the best capabilities in the subsequent versions. So I think that that's the thing that always stands out to me.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to Stani, Mo, and Sergey.
Thank you.